At 43, the world lost Reggie White, a man whose strength once shook stadiums and whose faith inspired millions. Known as the Minister of Defense, he was both a preacher and a punisher, a man who built his legend through violence while seeking peace in every breath. In the years before his sudden passing, White began speaking more openly about his regrets, his conflicts, and the truths he had kept buried beneath his armor. They were not the words of a fallen hero, but of a man searching for meaning beyond the roar of crowds. 5 secrets. 5 betrayals. 5 moments that defined him as much as they haunted him. He was adored for his dominance, yet misunderstood for his conviction. He could crush a quarterback, then kneel in prayer beside him. To his fans, he was a warrior of God. To those who knew him best, he was a man torn between calling and conflict. So, the question remains: how does a man reconcile faith and fury? How does a minister of peace survive in a game built on pain? This is not just the story of a football player. It is the confession of Reggie White. From Philadelphia to Green Bay. From glory to heartbreak. From sermon to silence. These are the 5 hidden truths that shaped his life, his career, and the legacy he left behind. Reggie White's story began in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in 1961. Faith and football defined his life from the beginning. Raised by his mother, Thelma, he grew up in a tight-knit community, where the church was the heart of everything. By the age of 12, he told his pastor he wanted to become a minister. By high school, he was also a dominant defensive lineman. The combination made him unique, a young man called to preach and to punish. At the University of Tennessee, his legend took root. He became an All-American, feared for his quickness and his ferocity. Teammates said he played with a purpose beyond victory. He believed his talent was divine. He prayed before games, asking for strength, then unleashed chaos on opponents. That paradox would follow him all his life. When the USFL collapsed, White entered the NFL in 1985, signing with the Philadelphia Eagles. Under coach Buddy Ryan, he found a system that let him explode. In just 8 seasons, he recorded 124 sacks and became the spiritual and emotional leader of the team. Fans worshipped him. Yet, behind the dominance, tension simmered. His fiery sermons unsettled some. His faith clashed with the culture of intimidation that Ryan loved. In 1993, White became the first true superstar free agent. Teams across the league lined up to sign him. He said he would go wherever God told him to go. The answer, surprisingly, was Green Bay. There, he transformed a struggling franchise into a champion, leading the Packers to a Super Bowl victory in 1997. Still, the journey was not peaceful. Controversy followed him, from his public sermons to his outspokenness on race and faith. His words sometimes divided audiences, but his heart remained constant. He wanted people to know his faith defined him more than his fame. When he retired, he left behind 200 sacks, 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, a Super Bowl ring, and the respect of his peers. Yet his soul carried burdens heavier than any trophy. His story was not only about dominance but also about the cost of conviction. When Reggie White joined the Philadelphia Eagles in 1985, he walked into a franchise desperate for identity. They found it in Buddy Ryan, the fiery head coach whose defenses were built on aggression, intimidation, and relentless pressure. Ryan's 46 defense was notorious, a scheme designed to break quarterbacks and overwhelm offensive lines. White, with his blend of power and speed, was the perfect weapon. At first, the partnership seemed divine. White flourished under Ryan's system, recording sacks at a pace the league had never seen. He wasn't just dominant, he was historic. Offensive linemen whispered his name in fear. Quarterbacks braced for his shadow. To fans, it appeared that Ryan and White were a perfect match, general and soldier, both dedicated to chaos. But behind closed doors, their relationship was more complex. Ryan was a coach who demanded loyalty to his authority. White was a man of deep conviction, unwilling to compromise faith or voice. While Ryan thrived on bravado and intimidation, White approached the game as both calling and battlefield. Their methods were different. Their visions sometimes collided. The friction grew in moments when Ryan's locker room culture clashed with White's principles. Ryan encouraged his defense to bend rules, to hit late, to leave scars. White wanted dominance too, but always framed within a higher moral code. He once admitted he prayed for the quarterbacks he crushed, even as he celebrated the sack. Ryan laughed at that. He wanted warriors, not sermons. The symbolic breaking point came during a heated stretch in 1989, when the Eagles' defense delivered punishing blows that bordered on reckless. White publicly defended his teammates, but in private, he questioned Ryan's philosophy. He feared that brutality for its own sake dishonored both the game and his faith. To White, winning meant more than pain. To Ryan, pain was the path to winning. One iconic moment summed it up. In a nationally televised game against the Cowboys, White demolished Troy Aikman with a devastating sack. The crowd roared. Ryan smirked. But when White knelt in prayer after the play, cameras caught Ryan shaking his head. It was more than a gesture, it was a fracture. Despite the tension, White never stopped respecting Ryan's genius. He admitted that Ryan unlocked his dominance, giving him freedom to wreak havoc in the trenches. But the truth is that White never fully embraced Ryan's world of unrestrained violence. The minister inside him resisted the cynicism of a coach who saw football as war and nothing else. The cold truth? Their bond was built on results, not trust. Ryan gave White the system to become a legend, but White never forgave the way Ryan dismissed his faith as weakness. Even years later, after both men left Philadelphia, White spoke of Ryan with mixed tones. Respect for the mind, but distance from the man. For the Minister of Defense, the clash with Buddy Ryan was not about wins or losses. It was about identity. Could a man of God thrive in a system fueled by intimidation? Could a preacher coexist with a general of brutality? That question lingered long after the Eagles' glory faded. He never forgot Buddy Ryan, and though he respected him, he never forgave the contempt that lived between faith and fear. In the early 1990s, the NFL was changing. Free agency had arrived, shattering decades of control by owners and giving players the power to choose their destiny. At the center of this revolution stood Reggie White. He was not just another defensive end hitting the market. He was the most dominant defender in football, the kind of player who could transform a franchise overnight. His decision would change the league forever. For the Philadelphia Eagles, losing White was unthinkable. He had carried their defense for nearly a decade, recording sacks at a pace unmatched in history. Fans expected the team to fight for him. But negotiations quickly turned sour. White believed the Eagles undervalued both his performance and his faith-driven leadership. Ownership offered words of respect, but contracts that told a different story. The divide grew, and White began to feel betrayed by the very franchise he had helped elevate. The courtship that followed became one of the most dramatic free agency sagas in NFL history. Nearly every team called. The 49ers, the Browns, the Jets, the Redskins, and even Dallas. White prayed for guidance, telling reporters he would go wherever God wanted him. That declaration sent shockwaves through the sports world. Critics mocked it. Some teammates doubted it. But for White, it was sincere. He saw his career not as a transaction, but as a mission. Green Bay, Wisconsin, seemed an unlikely answer. The Packers were far removed from their Lombardi-era glory. The team was young, the city small, and the winters brutal. Yet in 1993, White shocked the league by signing with the Packers. His reasoning was simple, if not controversial. God told him to go north. The fallout in Philadelphia was bitter. Fans who once adored him felt abandoned. Ownership portrayed the split as business, but White carried a deeper wound. He felt disrespected, as though his sacrifices on the field had been overlooked the moment money entered the equation. The Eagles moved on, but White never forgot. In Green Bay, he found vindication. Pairing with Brett Favre, he became the cornerstone of a rising dynasty. His presence transformed the Packers' defense, leading them to dominance and culminating in a Super Bowl victory in 1997. White had proven not only that his faith guided him, but also that leaving Philadelphia was the right choice. Yet beneath the triumph was a truth few acknowledged. The scars from his Philadelphia exit never healed. White admitted years later that he felt the franchise betrayed him, not for letting him leave, but for failing to honor what he gave them. The coldness of negotiations, the lack of respect in final conversations, cut deeper than dollars ever could. One lasting image reveals the duality of this truth. In the Super Bowl victory parade in Green Bay, White stood with the Lombardi Trophy in his hands, snow falling, fans chanting his name. He smiled, but in his heart he carried a silence about Philadelphia, the city that first embraced him and then let him walk away. The cold truth? Reggie White's free agency victory was not just about money or titles. It was about betrayal and redemption. He proved the Eagles wrong, but he never forgave them for forcing him to prove it. Few rivalries in football carried the same intensity as the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Dallas Cowboys during the late 80s and early 90s. For Reggie White, those clashes were more than divisional battles. They became symbolic wars of respect, faith, and pride. The Cowboys, America's team, represented glamour, wealth, and national spotlight. The Eagles, gritty and hungry, carried the weight of a city that demanded toughness above all else. White despised the arrogance that seemed to radiate from Dallas. Their polished image stood in stark contrast to the way Philadelphia bled for every yard. Facing the Cowboys, he carried not just the weight of a game, but of identity. For him, defeating Dallas was not optional. It was necessary. The friction grew personal in 1989, when Troy Aikman entered the league as the Cowboys' franchise quarterback. Aikman embodied everything Dallas wanted to project: youthful, golden, and destined for greatness. White, however, saw him as a target. In a nationally televised matchup, White demolished Aikman with a crushing sack that sent shockwaves across the league. The play became iconic, not just for its violence, but for the image of White immediately kneeling in prayer afterward. To some, it was contradictory. To White, it was clarity. He would punish on the field, but he prayed for the man beneath the helmet. Yet the rivalry was not only about Aikman. It was about the Cowboys' dynasty rising as the Eagles faltered. In the early 90s, Dallas built its empire with Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin. Philadelphia, despite White's brilliance, could not keep pace. The tension boiled in locker rooms, where White urged his teammates to match Dallas's fire, often frustrated by the lack of support around him. One unforgettable clash came in 1992, when the Eagles' defense, led by White, smothered the Cowboys in a brutal regular season showdown. White's dominance was absolute, collapsing the pocket, forcing Aikman into hurried throws, and battering the offensive line. For one night, Philadelphia looked superior, and White looked like the league's true force of nature. But when the postseason came, Dallas triumphed, beginning their march to multiple Super Bowls. That shift cut deeply. White carried resentment not only toward the Cowboys, but also toward his own organization, for failing to surround him with enough to conquer them. Dallas became both his rival and his measuring stick. The team that defined the limits of his Eagles years. Even after leaving Philadelphia, White's distaste for Dallas endured. In Green Bay, he relished victories against the Cowboys, treating them like personal vindication. Each sack against Aikman carried echoes of past frustrations, each win a balm against old wounds. Yet the truth remained. Dallas had built a dynasty, while Philadelphia had squandered his prime. The cold truth? The Cowboys were not just opponents to Reggie White. They were the mirror that showed him what might have been. Their glory highlighted his missed chances. Their dynasty underscored the failures of Philadelphia's front office, and their star power clashed against his grit and faith. He never forgave them for standing in the way of what he believed his Eagles should have achieved. For Reggie White, the battles with Dallas were eternal. He prayed for his rivals, but in his heart, the rivalry never died. Reggie White was never just a player chasing statistics. He believed football was both craft and calling. But the NFL is not a church, it is a business, and no conflict shaped White's career more than his battles with ownership. Contracts, respect, and the cold logic of money collided with his sense of loyalty and faith. It left scars that followed him from Philadelphia to Green Bay and beyond. From the beginning, White demanded to be valued not only for his dominance on the field but also for his leadership. He was the heart of defenses, a man who set standards in practice and spoke fire in locker rooms. But when negotiations came, he felt reduced to numbers. Owners and executives spoke in dollars, while White spoke of purpose. That difference created a gap that never closed. In Philadelphia, the tension was sharpest. White gave the Eagles everything. He delivered sacks, leadership, playoff appearances. Yet when the time came to secure his future, the organization treated him like a replaceable piece. He felt betrayed. The lack of genuine respect stung more than any lowball contract. It confirmed to him that loyalty in the NFL ran one way, from player to team, and never the other direction. The pattern repeated in Green Bay, though victories softened it. After delivering a Super Bowl championship in 1997, White expected lasting recognition. Instead, he encountered the same business-first approach. The Packers valued him, but the moment his production slowed with age, discussions about moving on surfaced. For White, it was a reminder that even the greatest are expendable when the ledger demands it. One telling episode came during his Philadelphia exit. White made a public statement declaring that God would decide where he played next. Ownership dismissed it as theatrics, but to White it was real. Their skepticism cut him deeply. It was not just about leaving money on the table. It was about being mocked for his faith, as though his spiritual compass had no place in boardrooms where careers were measured in years and millions. He carried that slight for years. Even while celebrating championships in Green Bay, he often reminded teammates that the league was a business above all. He warned them never to expect gratitude from ownership. He had lived that lesson too many times. The contradiction lay in his heart. White wanted to believe the NFL could be family, a place where loyalty was rewarded and faith respected. Instead, he learned that stadiums may roar with love, but in offices, love is a liability. He came to understand the brutal truth. Even legends are commodities once the ink dries. The cold truth? Reggie White never forgave ownership for treating his faith as a sideshow and his body as a tool. He gave everything: his strength, his health, his Sundays. In return, he was reminded that business always came first. That bitterness never left him. It became one of his hidden truths, a confession that behind his smile and sermons, he carried the sting of knowing he was revered on the field, yet always replaceable off it. Reggie White's greatest battle was not against quarterbacks, coaches, or even owners. It was against himself. The contradiction that defined him was also the wound that never healed. He was a minister who preached peace, yet he was a warrior who thrived on violence. He was a man who urged love and forgiveness, yet carried grudges that burned quietly in his soul. From the first time he put on pads, White viewed football as more than a game. It was a platform, a pulpit, a stage where he could serve God by excelling. Yet every Sunday he was called to strike, to injure, to destroy the will of his opponent. That tension created a storm inside him. He prayed before games, asking for protection, even as he prepared to unleash punishment on linemen and quarterbacks. Teammates often spoke of his duality. In the locker room, he could deliver a sermon powerful enough to move men to tears. Minutes later, he would storm onto the field and break through double teams with fury that seemed inhuman. For White, it was never hypocrisy. He believed the violence of football was separate from the violence of sin. Still, the weight of that contradiction pressed on him. The clearest example came in his post-game prayers. After crushing quarterbacks with hits that left them gasping for air, White would kneel on the field, thanking God for victory and safety. Cameras captured it, fans debated it, critics questioned it. Was it possible to reconcile faith and fury? White insisted it was, but the doubts followed him. His sermons away from the game added fuel. In the late 1990s, White spoke publicly about social issues, drawing both admiration and backlash. Some praised his courage to speak truth. Others condemned his words as controversial and divisive. The outcry revealed another layer of his inner struggle. He wanted to be a voice for God, yet he was still bound by the expectations of fame. When the world judged his sermons, it also judged his soul. Even in retirement, White could not escape the conflict. His body bore the toll of 1,000 collisions, proof of the violence he once delivered. His heart carried regrets about grudges he never let go. Yet he also carried pride, believing he had walked the path God placed before him. That paradox defined his legacy. The truth is that White's fiercest opponent was never an offensive tackle or a quarterback. It was the mirror. He wrestled with himself, trying to reconcile the minister who preached forgiveness with the defender who sought domination. He admitted that balance was never perfect. The struggle lasted his entire life. The cold truth? Reggie White never truly forgave himself for the contradiction of his existence. He believed in his mission, yet questioned whether the violence of his profession conflicted with the faith that guided him. That hidden truth is the one that shaped every other. It was the battle he could never win. the rivalry that never ended. For the Minister of Defense, the final grudge was not against an opponent, a coach, or an owner. It was against the impossible task of being both servant and soldier, saint and sack artist. That inner conflict remains the most haunting part of his story. Among all the rivals and controversies that shaped Reggie White's career, one hidden truth lies not in conflict, but in heartbreak. It was the sudden loss of Jerome Brown, his teammate, brother-in-arms, and spiritual confidant. Brown was more than a defensive tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles. He was the fiery soul of the defense, a man whose laughter filled locker rooms and whose power filled trenches. Together, White and Brown formed one of the most feared defensive lines in football history. They were unstoppable, feeding off each other's energy, each sack and hit echoing like thunder. But in June of 1992, tragedy struck. Jerome Brown died in a car accident at just 27 years old. For White, the news shattered something inside him. He had lost not only a teammate but also a friend who shared his battles, who understood the burden of being both dominant and human. At Brown's funeral, White spoke through tears, his voice trembling with grief and faith. He promised that Jerome's spirit would live on in every play he made. Yet behind the words was a sorrow he never fully overcame. Some teammates said that after Brown's death, White was never quite the same. He carried that loss like a scar, invisible but permanent. The cold truth? Reggie White's hidden grudge was against fate itself. He never forgave the game, or life, for taking away the brother who stood beside him in the trenches. It was not an enemy he could tackle, or a rival he could sack. It was the cruel reminder that even legends are powerless against time and tragedy. Reggie White's journey through football was not only a march of victories, sacks, and Super Bowl glory. It was a path filled with contradictions, conflicts, and truths that revealed the cost of greatness. Each rivalry and betrayal shaped him. Each hidden wound carved into the legend of the Minister of Defense. To understand his legacy, one must see the man not only as a champion but also as a soldier of faith who carried battles both external and internal. His clash with Buddy Ryan defined the start of his legend. Ryan gave him the stage to become unstoppable, yet dismissed his faith as weakness. For White, that contradiction marked the first lesson. Systems and schemes could make a player powerful, but respect could not be forced. He admired Ryan's mind but never forgave his contempt. That tension revealed how even perfect partnerships were fractured by values. Free agency became the next crucible. Leaving Philadelphia for Green Bay was more than a transaction. It was betrayal and redemption woven together. The Eagles undervalued him, and he never forgot that pain. Yet, in Green Bay he found vindication, raising the Lombardi Trophy, and proving that faith and destiny guided his steps. That chapter showed the league that stars could choose their own path. It also revealed the cost of being treated as a commodity in a business that cared more for profit than for loyalty. The Cowboys' rivalry cut even deeper. To White, they symbolized everything his Eagles could not be. Their dynasty mocked the effort he poured into a team that never quite reached the summit. Every sack of Troy Aikman was more than a statistic. It was personal, a desperate attempt to prove Philadelphia could match the glamour of Dallas. But in the end, the Cowboys became a mirror reflecting missed chances. Their triumphs reminded White of the championships he never captured in green and silver. Ownership, contracts, and the cold machinery of the NFL left him with another scar. White believed the league could be family, a brotherhood that valued loyalty and faith. Instead, he discovered that even legends were replaceable the moment their numbers declined. That realization hardened him. He preached to younger players about the truth of business, warning them not to trust promises from front offices. The sting of those negotiations, the lack of respect for his convictions, remained with him long after his final snap. And then there was Jerome Brown. The death of his closest teammate revealed the fragility of everything he fought for. Football had taught White to dominate opponents, but nothing in the trenches prepared him for losing a brother in his prime. Brown's death haunted him, reminding him that even the strongest defenses collapsed against time and fate. White carried that pain as quietly as any grudge, a sorrow too deep to erase. Yet beyond those conflicts, White's legacy rose higher. In Green Bay, he became the face of a rebirth. His arrival transformed a forgotten franchise into champions once more. Fans in Wisconsin saw him not only as a defender of quarterbacks but as a defender of hope, His sack of Drew Bledsoe in Super Bowl 20 became a moment frozen in history, proof that even in the twilight of his career, he remained unstoppable. Off the field, his influence reached far beyond the game. He preached in churches, on television, and in locker rooms. He challenged players to see themselves as more than athletes, to find purpose beyond the game. Sometimes his words sparked controversy, but they also reflected his conviction to live authentically. White never separated his faith from his football. That blend made him both inspiring and polarizing, a figure larger than the game itself. When Reggie White passed away in 2004 at the age of 43, the football world was stunned. He seemed too strong to fall, too righteous to fade. His death was sudden, a reminder that even giants can vanish in silence. Teammates remembered his laughter and his fire. Opponents recalled the helplessness of facing him. Reggie White's legacy became a tapestry of contradictions. Faith and fury, love and conflict, glory and regret. Beyond trophies and glory, it was grudges, betrayals, and hidden truths that shaped him. He was a minister and a destroyer, a servant and a soldier. His story reminded the world that even legends wrestle with doubt, and sometimes, that struggle is the true mark of greatness. Reggie White's story did not end with his final game. It ended with a silence that echoed louder than any stadium cheer. When he passed away in 2004, at only 43, the football world stopped to mourn not just a champion, but a man whose faith and fury defined an era. He left behind questions that still stir debate. Which truth revealed the real Reggie White? Was it the clash with Buddy Ryan, where his faith met the brutality of football? The betrayal he felt from ownership, when loyalty was traded for numbers? The rivalry with the Cowboys, that symbol of glamour he vowed to defeat? Or the battle within himself, between the preacher and the warrior, the servant and the soldier? Every truth he carried revealed a piece of the man behind the legend. His contradictions made him human. His honesty made him immortal. At NFL Hidden Truths, we uncover stories like this because they remind us what greatness really costs. It is never just about trophies or fame. It is about conviction, sacrifice, and the moments that shape the soul. If Reggie White's story moved you, subscribe to NFL Hidden Truths for more untold confessions from football's golden age. Discover the legends who rose, fell, and revealed the truths that history tried to hide. The minister of defense may be gone, but his legacy lives on in every man who still believes that faith and fire can coexist.